You'll often hear representatives of the NRA complain that all we Americans who support gun control want to do is pass new gun laws.
Which is true.
And we do.
You do?
We definitely do.
Okay, as long as you're sure.
But that characterization is a little misleading. Sure, there are lots of proposed gun regulations that we would love to see enacted at the federal level.
Yes, we know this.
But there are also a few gun laws that are currently in force that we would like to get rid of.
Say what now?
So, in the interest of finding common ground...
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry. Oh, I can't even pretend that this is about building bridges with the NRA. Fuck the NRA.
Knew it had to be a sham. Since when do you step outside of the echo chamber? Actually, now that I think about it, why do you speak up against the NRA anyway? The NRA is led by a woman. And by your own logic, you shouldn't speak against a woman. Hey everybody, and welcome back. So, Mr. Blocks Everybody on Twitter has 3 gun laws that he wants to repeal.
And by the way, none of these 3 laws will be the Second Amendment, if that's what you're worried about. Yes, getting rid of the Second Amendment would make regulating firearms in the United States a lot easier, and it certainly wouldn't break my heart.
And you know, for somebody who thinks that Trump is going to be the downfall of America and want to gather up and gas all the LGBTs and the illegal immigrants and whatnot, you seem to be very eager to want to get rid of the only amendment in the Constitution that guarantees the people the ability to make sure he can't do that. I did comment that with a hypothetical scenario involving Trump rounding up and trying to gas all the gays and whatnot. I'm going to see if you will include that in your next Ask Away. However, I doubt it, considering it'll make you think outside of your little bubble.
But I'm not going to propose repealing the Second Amendment in this video. So all of you folks watching who regard the Second Amendment as an addendum to the 10 Commandments can relax.
Steve, nobody that thinks like that is watching this video in order to agree with you or see what your opinion might be. They're watching to laugh at your hilarious, uneducated bullshit, or to make a debunking video. Kinda like me.
For now.
You say that like the day that you make that video, they're going to automatically repeal the Second Amendment. Well, bad news for you, Steve. If you read the actual words of the Second Amendment, it actually prohibits the government from repealing it. That's what shall not be infringed means.
Anyway, first up, the Firearm Owners Protection Act. Passed by Congress and signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1986, this was the first major legislative victory for the National Rifle Association since it was taken over by right-wing gun fetishists in 1977.
See, this guy is actually stupid enough to believe that all gun owners are like... when really all we want is... Which, fun fact for you, Steve, Ronald Reagan actually survived a gunshot wound from an assassination attempt. Yet he still worked to protect our right to bear arms. Yes, he did ban automatic weapons, which is something I do disagree with to an extent. But still, for the most part, he worked to protect our Second Amendment rights. Instead of being a coward and acting like we had to ban all guns just because of one bad experience with one.
The Firearm Owners Protection Act, or FOPA, undermined much of what had been accomplished less than 20 years prior in the Gun Control Act of 1968.
The Gun Control Act of 1968 was actually a very unconstitutional document, which will be explained as I debunk point by point in this next segment. And by unconstitutional, I do mean Abe Lincoln wanted to drop down off of an eagle and bitch slap the president type unconstitutional.
Of the people, by the people, for the people, legal! Ah!
FOPA legalized shipping ammunition through the U.S. mail, rescinded the requirement for dealers to keep records on sales of non-armor-piercing ammunition, made it easier to transport firearms across state lines, and banned the federal government from ever creating a database linking firearms to their owners, except in cases of firearms that are part of criminal investigations.
Yes, because we have the right to ship ammunition by mail. We have the right to sell guns across state lines. The fact that those laws were prohibited in the first place was unconstitutional. So get over it, soy boy.
There is a national background check system designed to prevent gun purchases by people who are legally prohibited from having guns.
A law I do agree with, despite the fact that I think we need to tweak it a little bit.
But any records generated by that system, by law, have to be destroyed within 24 hours. So how many guns are out there? Who has them? We don't know!
And you want to know why? Because it's not the government's business what I own! And besides, what good would that do? Only 5% of legally purchased firearms are used in actual crimes. That means that 95% of legally purchased firearms are used the way they're supposed to be. For sport, for self-defense, and just because we like guns and we want to have a gun.
Something else about FOPA. You know how sometimes pro-gun folks will respond to calls for more gun control by saying, there's plenty of gun laws on the books, why don't we just focus on enforcing the gun laws we already have?
There are 15 teenagers and 2 teachers in Parkland, Florida that probably would have appreciated that.
Well, FOPA made it more difficult for federal agents to enforce existing federal gun laws.
Up next will be another example of his deception and dishonesty.
Isn't that something?
Nah, you usually are dishonest and deceptive, so...
Since the 1940s, enforcing federal firearms laws has been the responsibility of the agency which we now call the ATF.
ATF! What does that stand for anyway? Alcohol, tobacco, and fuck up!
The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Explosives don't get a letter. The Gun Control Act of 1968 mandated federal licensing of professional firearms dealers and gave the ATF fairly broad powers to ensure that federal firearms licensees were observing all necessary regulations.
One thing that's being left out of this argument, actually, is the fact that the ATF was actually overstepping their bounds and abusing their power. They were constantly harassing gun owners, gun store owners, and gun manufacturers with ridiculous amounts of inspections, and in some cases costing people business.
After the Gun Control Act went into effect, the NRA began complaining that the burden of complying with ATF inspections was driving some gun dealers out of business.
For one, that is not what they were saying. They were standing up against the abuse of power from the ATF. Secondly, the government should not have the power or the right to regulate anybody out of business. That is heading into very dangerous territory. The type of territory for which the Second Amendment was designed to deal with.
Which to me sounds a lot like Philip Morris complaining that federal regulations are driving tobacco distributors out of business. And my response would be exactly the same. Oh yeah? Good.
Fuck you, you smug, selfish, entitled asshole.
Isn't that the point?
That should never be the point of government.
But the gun dealers and the people who wanted to buy guns from them and the NRA, which collects membership dues from both groups, didn't see it that way. So in 1986, FOPA mandated that the ATF could only conduct compliance inspections of federally licensed firearm dealers once a year.
Which is all that needs to happen.
You hear that, ATF? Stop harassing those poor gun dealers by making sure that they're obeying the law, okay? Once per year is all you get. Leave the merchants of death alone.
Gun dealers are not merchants of death, you fucking idiot. Only 5% of legally purchased firearms are used in crimes, which means that the other 95% of gun crime is done with illegally purchased firearms. Do you know what the word illegally means?
Illegal.
Before I move on, there is one provision of FOPA that is worth keeping. The act bans the sale of new automatic weapons to civilians. So let's hang on to that. And amend it to also ban semi-automatics.
Hello? Hey Steve, the Second Amendment called. Told you to fuck off.
Sorry, never mind. This video is about getting rid of gun laws, not adding new ones. I just couldn't help myself.
Yeah, of course you couldn't help yourself. As you're sitting here saying that we should get rid of gun laws that were put in place to protect our Second Amendment right from assholes like you.
Anyway, next, the Dickey Amendment.
Dickey.
This sneaky little bastard was added to the Omnibus Spending Bill passed by Congress in 1996. It requires, quote, that none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention may be used to advocate or promote gun control. The Dickey Amendment is usually interpreted as a ban on the CDC doing research into gun violence, and practically speaking, that's what it's been.
False. The CDC is fully permitted to conduct research on gun violence. They just haven't had the funds to do so, which I do agree needs to change.
The CDC has conducted limited research into gun violence since the adoption of the amendment, but this research has been mostly in relation to other problems, such as domestic abuse or suicide. And because of the amendment, the CDC has been reluctant to commit significant resources to gun violence research projects.
Wrong. They are not given the funds to do that research. But thankfully there are a lot of private corporations that do this research for us, which you would actually benefit from looking up. Then maybe you can make an accurate video on this subject. But then again, stepping outside your echo chamber isn't really something you're used to doing. So...
The most recent omnibus spending bill, which was just passed last week, is accompanied by a report that clarifies that the CDC is allowed to conduct gun violence research.
Which is a good thing.
But the Dickey Amendment remains in effect.
Also good.
That means that if the CDC does study gun violence and finds evidence that gun control measures would help to address the problem, it still can't advocate for gun control.
The way it reads to me is that the CDC is not allowed to use funds to, say, put out commercials and actively push propaganda to sway the public in the direction of gun control. I do, however, believe that they are allowed to use their research to show to lawmakers to suggest, hey, maybe this law would do something about this particular problem.
Even if the data show that gun control would be a good thing, the CDC is prohibited by law from supporting it.
Wrong. They can't use their own funds to advocate for gun control. They're allowed to put the research out there. They're not allowed to use their own funds to advocate for gun control.
Thanks, Congressman Dick E.
You had to emphasize the word dick, didn't you?
He was a Republican, by the way. Did I need to tell you that?
Oh my God, who the hell cares?
And finally, laws preventing the destruction of confiscated guns.
That's a good thing.
It's called recycling.
This last one isn't a single federal law, but rather several state laws, all of which either encourage or in some cases require police departments to sell confiscated firearms rather than destroy them.
What the fuck is wrong with that? You take them from bad people, and you give them to good people.
Police departments around the country accumulate tens of thousands of guns every year. These guns are seized during busts, collected as evidence during criminal investigations, or voluntarily turned in during buyback or amnesty programs. In many cases, these guns are eventually destroyed.
That's a waste of perfectly good guns.
Oh no! They took the rest of my guns!
But 11 states, Arizona, Georgia, Kansas, Louisiana, Michigan, Montana, North Carolina, North Dakota, Texas, Tennessee, and West Virginia,
all the states I love going to and would not mind living in,
have laws that push police departments to sell the guns and in some cases prohibit police departments from destroying confiscated or recovered guns. Hopefully, the foolishness of laws that discourage or prohibit the destruction of confiscated guns is obvious. Guns that are destroyed can't hurt anybody. Guns that are put back into circulation can be used to shoot and kill people.
Two things. One, when you take a gun from a bad guy, and you sell it back to a law-abiding citizen, it's not gonna harm anybody. Unless you break into their house and then you get shot because you're a dumbass and broke into their house, in which case that is legal because it is self-defense, but whatever.
Finally! I get to use my guns, protect my house, legally shoot a man. I can't wait!
Number 2. Isn't he a one goofy-looking motherfucker?
So are you.
And by the way, that has already happened at least a few times. In an article published a few years ago, CNN Money documents 4 cases.
Wait, how many?
4 cases.
4. There are 96 deaths a day by illegal gun violence in Chicago, but you are upset about 4 acts of violence because of 4 redistributed guns.
The NRA claims that destroying confiscated guns is wasteful because those guns could be sold to law-abiding citizens.
And what's the problem with that?
But something tells me the NRA is less interested in looking out for the law-abiding gun owners or aspiring gun owners, God help us.
Aren't you an atheist? Don't ask God to help you forward your bullshit propaganda. By the way, God was a gun owner.
Oh, God, kill me now.
Hello.
Karen.
And more interested in doing right by the gun dealers, who can acquire firearms from police sales at much lower prices than they could elsewhere.
Capitalism, motherfucker. Also, I'd like to note that the NRA is in the interest of protecting everybody's right to bear arms. The law-abiding citizen, the gun dealer, the gun manufacturer. All of us in America have the right to bear arms. And they constantly have to defend it because it's constantly under attack by assholes like you that think a gun is nothing more than a boomstick designed to make people drop.
After all, it was the plight of the poor, persecuted gun dealers which the NRA cited when it objected to the effects of the Gun Control Act of 1968 and oversaw the gutting of the ATF's enforcement power with the passage of FOPA in 1986. The easier it is to make money selling guns, the more gun dealers there will be.
And more gun dealers is a good thing. More gun dealers means more competition. More competition means it'll be easier for me to find a cheaper gun when I go to buy another gun. Capitalism, motherfucker.
The more gun dealers there are, the more people's livelihoods will depend on people buying and selling guns.
Capitalism, motherfucker.
The more that happens, the more the NRA can paint gun control efforts as attacking hard-working, law-abiding Americans.
Because that's what gun control does. It specifically attacks the law-abiding citizens. Criminals don't obey the law, you fucking idiot. But anyway, I'm stopping it there because all he does is repeat himself to the end, and I'm going to be compelled to shoot my brains out if I keep listening to his stupid-ass talk. Anyway, that's going to wrap up this week's video. I don't really need to make any conclusion because I'm pretty sure we can all conclude that Steve Shives knows nothing about the Second Amendment because he's too dumb to step outside the echo chamber and do some actual research. But anyway, if y'all liked the video, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit that bell so you're notified every time I go live and whenever I make a video. You can follow me on Twitter at hey_dude77, and I will catch y'all next time. Later.